Welcome to Best of Reddit. Today we're looking at stories from subreddit slash ProRevenge. Let's dive in. Tricking my slacker coworker into sabotaging himself. I work in an office with a guy I'll call Seth. Seth is that coworker everyone knows. Lazy, always passing his work on to someone else, and somehow always getting away with it. He'll sit around on his phone or go to the bathroom every 10 minutes. He's the kind of guy who will show up late, make some lame excuse about traffic, and then disappear for lunch for 2 hours. For the past 6 months, Seth's favorite target has been me. He'll send emails asking if I can help out with a project, but what he really means is do all the work while I take the credit. I complained to my boss a couple of times, but somehow Seth always managed to weasel his way out of trouble. The final straw came when he passed off a major report that was due to a client in 2 days, dumping it on me last minute. One day, I casually asked him if he was good with Microsoft Excel, and he admitted he didn't know much about it. Perfect. The next time Seth tried to dump a bunch of spreadsheets on me to organize for his next report, I agreed. But this time, I embedded a series of hidden formulas into the documents. These formulas didn't do anything important, just enough to mess with the numbers if someone didn't know how to check for hidden cells. It took me a little time, but I was careful not to make it too obvious. The kicker? Every time Seth tried to copy and paste the data into his report, it would scramble everything just enough to be completely useless. On the day the report was due, Seth slacked off like usual, assuming I had handled it like always. When the client called, furious because the report was filled with nonsense numbers, Seth panicked. He rushed to fix it, but every time he tried to fix one part of the report, something else would break. He came to me frantic and asked for help. I acted confused and said, "Oh, I don't know what happened. Maybe it's a glitch?" I gave him some vague advice and watched as he spent the entire day trying to salvage his mess. Our boss found out, and for once Seth couldn't talk his way out of it. He got lambasted for screwing up such an important project and was put on temporary leave without pay. I guess he'll be doing his own work from now on. It's clear the OP has had it up to here with Seth's lazy antics, and who can blame them? In the end, justice is served, and the OP is not an asshole. They just made sure the system worked as it should, with a little added flair. Cheat on your wife with mine, I will burn your life to the ground. Way back in the early 2000s, I began to suspect that my wife was up to something. Our 2 kids were about 4 and 6, still young, but not so young they couldn't tell you something about what had happened in their day. They started talking a lot about staying with my wife's parents during the day, which wasn't really that strange in and of itself. But since they lived about 90 minutes away, doing so 2 or 3 times a week seemed a bit much. That was basically every day she wasn't working at her part-time job. When I asked her about it, she denied it, but was never a good liar. So I started tracking the mileage on her car, and sure enough, she was driving an extra 400 or so miles per week. I knew some shit was going on. Then one day I sat down at the computer, and she had left a sticky note with her America Online password written on it next to the keyboard. I could not resist and logged in to read her emails and saw a few email exchanges between her and her college best friend forever where they discussed how my wife was regularly fucking one of her ex-boyfriends from high school. No mention of details about him, other than my wife also talking shit about his wife making fun of how she'd gotten fat after having kids. Anyway, I printed out these email exchanges and stashed them. I still needed to know the details, so I called a friend who was a police officer, and he suggested I call a guy he knew that had left the force to become a private investigator. Ron was great. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails and what little I knew about my wife's activities, and he figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos and times, dates, locations, all about how she would take the kids to her parents, then go meet this guy for lunch. Then they'd go to a dumpy motel for a few hours, after which she'd pick up the kids and return home. At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents cheated on each other, and the fallout absolutely fucked mine and my siblings' childhood. It was something that was totally unacceptable. I also asked Ron to find out what he could about this guy. Ron absolutely came through. I learned his name, Bob, that he was married and had 3 kids. I also found out that he worked as a vice president of sales for his father-in-law's business. At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Ron for a couple more copies of his report, and one more thing I wanted him to do for me. On the same day I had my wife served with the divorce papers at her work, I had Ron meet with this guy's wife and show her everything he'd found out. She seemed nice, and I figured that she deserved to know what her dear hubby was up to. What she did with that information was up to her. While the information about my wife's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, Bob's wife did a real number on him. According to the publicly available court documents from the divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her dad found out what he'd done, Bob was fired, and since her parents actually owned the house where Bob and his wife lived, he also got evicted. Their divorce was ugly. Lots of fighting in and evidently out of court. I guess Bob went to the house and started arguing with his wife, and it escalated to the point that her brother stepped in, and Bob got his nose broken. There were restraining orders, a few more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, jail time, and so on. I can't find Bob on the internet anywhere these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state and his ex-wife did okay. She went to work at her dad's company and took over after he retired. As for me, my ex and I got along well enough. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all anymore. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kids' mom and is important to them. Nothing beyond that. The OP is definitely not an asshole, though they do seem to have a penchant for getting revenge, which is pretty hilarious in this case, and in the end, they just wanted to protect their kids from the truth. Neighbor was stealing water from my supply, so I ruined him. I live in Asia and just purchased a new house. Now, the previous owners were family friends who needed cash urgently and haven't been living in my country for nearly 3 years. So I got it for a great price in the middle of the capital city. The sale was finalized at the start of this month, and I moved in right after. The house was definitely a fixer-upper, as the previous owners had left mid-renovation, and the main door was locked with just a padlock, not even a door lock. The house had no gate, meaning anyone could just walk right on in. The first day I moved in, someone's bike was parked in the garage. I just parked it on the road on the same day I had a gate installed. An angry man was knocking on my gate later, and I didn't bother answering. But through my window, I could see him giving up and taking the bike after 15 minutes. So already I wasn't digging the neighborhood, but I didn't have any incidents after that, aside from people not knowing that this was no longer an abandoned house. So my gate was blocked more often than never, but a no parking sign on my gate fixed that issue. Last week I was having a shower in my bathroom, and I noticed my water pressure was lower than usual. I also heard my next door neighbor's water pump going. Now this neighbor, an old guy, lived in a 3-storied house, the first being the lowest and the one he lived in. The other 2 floors were rented out to tenants. This guy wasn't happy about the house being sold and voiced many concerns to my friends, the previous owners. He was super angry about it. And my friends did warn me, but I'm a sick-sift guy with 3 dogs. No way he was doing anything, and yep, he didn't. So with this living situation, a water pump is needed to pump water to the tanks on the roof, since the public supply's pressure is not enough to get it up 3 stories. Now, I heard the water pump going and immediately was suspicious. Sure, coincidences exist, but it wouldn't hurt to check it out. I waited till his pump turned off and then turned on different taps in the house. Sure enough, the pressure was back to normal. This made me even more suspicious, but if he was stealing water, it also made sense. The water bills had been going up over the years this house wasn't lived in, but the house also had some water leaks. So it was chalked up to that, even if the bills were too high to be caused just by leaks. Now it's starting to make sense. At some point in the last 3 years, this old miser thought he'd save the cost of paying for water and waltzed into the property and is siphoning water from my lines. I couldn't find where exactly he was siphoning water from, but after checking my pressure multiple times, I was pretty sure. So I sat on it for a few days, thinking if I should confront him, go the legal path, or just let it be. Now, water in my country is very cheap. My total bill, even with washing 3 animals, a car every week, and watering my garden, only costs like $5 per month, even with the neighbor also stealing some of it. But it wasn't about how much I was paying or who was paying for it. It's about entitled old people who think that they're deserving of using other people's resources without paying for it and then getting away with it. It didn't sit right with me, and I really wanted to teach the original poster a lesson. What I did was really simple. I just turned off my water from the main supply. I wouldn't have to break into his property, nor would I be breaking any laws. It was the best way of getting back at him without needing to even lift a muscle. So on Monday, just 4 days ago, I waited till the pump flicked on and turned off the supply. Now, the way household tanks work in my country is that there's a ball valve in the tank which detects the level of water and turns on the pump. If the level doesn't increase, the valve stays open, which electronically sends a signal to the pump to stay on until the level gets to a point at which the valve closes and also shuts off the pump. However, the level wasn't increasing, and anyone knows that starving a pump of water isn't a good idea. This way, my expectation was that I'd burn out his pump and cause issues with his tenants. What I didn't account for is that his pump running constantly would mess up the fuses by constantly drawing power overnight and absolutely destroy his wiring. If he decided to upgrade his household wiring to a more modern standard, this would have been prevented. This house clearly still had 90s era wiring. At around 3 a.m., I heard all residents in the house waking up and talking in hushed voices about why just their house in the neighborhood doesn't have power or water. I found out about the power part because the tenants devolved into shouting at their landlord. Our tenant protection laws are very important, and power and water are classed as essential, even on a state level. Cutting those services are grounds for lawsuits, unless due to weather or some other unavoidable reason. In this case, the landlord is responsible for keeping the house wiring up to date and in good condition, alongside the supply of water. So the tenants were not happy, and one of them immediately moved out 2 days later when it was informed that water and electricity will not be returning the very same day this happened. Both tenants in the 2 floors lodged a complaint with the police, and if a person is in clear breach of laws, the police have the authority to fine or penalize the person without a court judgment. It can be challenged in court if the person thinks that they were unfairly penalized, but they still have to pay the fines and will only be refunded if and when the court finds the fines unlawful. So now the landlord lost both tenants and has to pay a fine of $500, which is a lot of money in our country. He also has to refund the security deposits of both tenants and cannot rent out until both issues are fixed, which will cost him more money. As of right now, he's moving out on Sunday to his daughter's place since he cannot afford to live alone. The tenants were his only source of income, and he's a retired mechanic, so he has no other income. He did find out why the motor kept drawing power, overloaded the wiring, and burned out. He came by to my gate and asked me if I turned off my water. And I said, "Oh yeah, my tank had a new leak on a pipe and I turned it off till the next day until the plumber came by to fix the issue." Y'all, the look on his face. He kept a straight expression, but I just knew he was holding back. He just said, "Oh, okay," and went back inside. Not sure if he knows I know, but I don't care because he can't do anything. I'm getting a plumber down next week to correct my plumbing and to remove any pipes that leave my property. So I got rid of my water issue and a neighbor who could potentially be a pain in the ass by simply flicking a tap off. 2 birds, 1 stone, I'd say. TLDR. Bought an abandoned house, neighbor was siphoning water from my supply. Turned off my water supply when the motor was running. Motor burned out the wiring in the house and cut off water and power to him and his tenants. Tenants lodged police complaints and the landlord got fined. Is now destitute and forced to move in with his daughter. It seems the OP has a knack for creative problem solving. And in this case, it's safe to say the OP isn't an asshole, but rather a clever homeowner who stood up for their rights.